Good morning. Today I'll be reading Chapter 5 of Midnite. Midnite's Hairy Godmother. At midday, Midnite rose from his bed in the cottage in the orchard and set to work to make himself new sheepskin shoes, for his old ones had been forfeited to the crown, which is a polite way of saying that the Queen had bushranged them from him. All afternoon he worked on his shoes and on soft-soaping his bridle and saddle, and on doing a lot more things that he had been meaning to do before he was put in jail. And in the evening he lit the lamps and cooked his supper and sat snugly in the kitchen talking to Cat. Cat was feeling much better by then, and even laughed when he remembered how silly Trooper O'Grady had been when he was drunk. While they were talking, they heard a sudden footstep on the veranda. "Psst," whispered Cat. "I'm going to hide. Take care." And he disappeared into another room. "Who is there?" called Midnite, seizing his pistols, aiming them at the door. "Only me," said a funny voice. And the strangest-looking old woman came in. She had on an old purple dress, one of those collars around her neck that are made out of a fox with the eyes still on it, long grey hair with a horse's tail, and a velvet hat covered with flowers and little grapes and bananas and cherries and things that were always nodding and tinkling together. "Who are you?" said Midnite sternly. "A friend," said the old woman. "How can you be my friend?" said Midnite. "I have never seen you before in my life." "I am your godmother," said the old woman. "Are you really?" said Midnite. "I didn't know I had a godmother." "Everybody has a godmother," said the woman. "To be kind to them and cheer them up when they are miserable, that is what godmothers are for, as you would know if you had ever read any fairy stories." "Well, that is a good idea," said Midnite, "and I was miserable yesterday, but I'm quite happy today, thank you." "I shall make you even happier," said the old woman. "How?" asked Midnite. But the old woman only shook her head and smiled. "You are in too great a hurry," she scolded fondly. "Why, here am I, your godmother, visiting you for the first time, and you have not even asked me to sit down." Midnite blushed to think that he had been so bad-mannered, and he quickly led the old woman to his best chair and begged her to make herself comfortable. The old woman sat back in the chair in the easiest manner, with the ankle of one leg cocked over the knee of the other, which caused her purple skirt to take on rather a curious shape, and said, "So this is where you live?" "Yes," said Midnite cautiously, for he did not intend to tell his godmother about the Hidden Valley. "And very nice too," said the old woman. "Are you all alone?" "Oh, no," said Midnite. "I have a gang." "Ah," said the old woman, looking at him with a twinkling black eye. "And where are they?" "Out," said Midnite vaguely. All this time he had been studying his godmother as closely as he could without seeming to stare at her, and he had come to the conclusion that he was exceedingly glad that she had not kissed him. Although it was obvious that his godmother had quite recently shaved, she had dark bristles all over the lower part of her face, and she looked very prickly. Her hands, too, had black hairs on the backs of them, and from the little that he could see of her, Midnite judged her to be the most preposterously hairy old woman in the whole colony. "Well," said the old woman, cackling, "you will know me again, I dare say." "I am sorry," said Midnite with a blush. "I did not mean to stare, but you are so extremely different from anybody else." "Yes, indeed," said the old woman. "I am the only person like me, and you should be proud to have me as your godmother." "Oh, I am," said Midnite, trying very hard to sound as if he meant it. The old woman crossed her legs in the opposite direction, settled herself again, and remarked, "At this hour, I usually have a drink." "So do I," said Midnite. "I have cocoa." "Do you really?" said the old woman. "I have a whiskey and soda." "I am sorry," said Midnite, "but there is no whiskey in my house, and there never will be." "No, no," said the old woman with a wave of her hand. "Don't apologize. Cocoa will do very well." So Midnite got up and made 2 cups of cocoa, and when the old woman was seated across from the table from him, he said, "You told me just now you would make me even happier. How?" "Ah," said the old woman, "now we come to it. Well, dear old chap, I am going to sing you a song." "A song?" said Midnite. "A song," said the old woman, "which will make you pleased and proud. It is a song about a bold bushranger, and his name is Midnite." "That is very interesting," said Midnite, laying down his pistols on the table. "I hope you do not need music or a piano, because I have not got any." "No," said the old woman, "I make it up as I go along," and she began to sing in a preposterous voice. "'Tis a wild colonial boy, Captain Midnite was his name, of poor but honest parents he was born at—" Here the old woman stopped and asked, "Where were you born?" "At Blackadder Creek," said Midnite. "If you are my godmother, you should know that." "Do you mind," said the old woman, "if I call it Blackadder Drain? Then my song will rhyme." "You must do what you think best," said Midnite. "I don't know the first thing about poetry." The old woman started again and sang this verse. "'Tis of a wild colonial boy, Captain Midnite was his name. Of poor but honest parents he was born at Blackadder Drain. He was his father's only hope, his mother's only joy, and dearly did his parents love the wild colonial boy." "That is very nice," said Midnite, with a tear on his cheek as he thought of his father and mother. "There is better to come," said the old woman, and she went on. "He was scarcely 17 years of age when he left his father's home, and through Australia's sunny clime a bushranger did roam. He robbed those wealthy squatters, their stock he did destroy, and a terror to Australia was the wild colonial boy." "Am I really?" said Midnight. "A terror to Australia?" "And to New Zealand," said the old woman, and she continued. "In 66 this daring youth commenced his wild career. With a heart that knew no danger, no foeman did he fear. He stuck up the country mail coach, Judge Pepper he did annoy, who trembling cold gave up his gold to the wild colonial boy." "That's jolly good," said Midnight, laughing, "but don't say anything about Trooper O'Grady picking my pocket." "No, I won't," promised the old woman, and she went on. "He bade the judge good morning, and told him to beware, for I'd never rob a hearty chap that acted on the square. But a judge that would rob a mother of her only son in joy is no better than an outlaw," said the wild colonial boy. "I didn't say that," remarked Midnight. "Never mind," said the old woman, "you forgot to say it," and she went on. One night as he sat in his lair the mountainside along, a-listening to his godmother her pleasant laughing song, a trooper called O'Grady, well that name he did employ. "Midnight," called Cat from the next room, "do you know who this is?" "Aha," said the old woman, "the Siamese Confederate," and she sang in a different voice. "Reached out and snapped the handcuffs on the wild colonial boy." "Shoot, Midnight, shoot," called Cat. "Too late," said the old woman, drawing a pistol out of her bosom and sweeping up Midnight's pistols from the table, "and this time I'll have the Siamese Confederate too, or die in the attempt." "Then you better die now," O'Grady called Cat, "and not tire yourself out for nothing." "You are under arrest," shouted the old woman, rushing into the room that Cat's voice was coming from. But the room was quite empty, and the window was only open about 6 inches, far too little for even a very small Siamese man to have gotten through. "Strange, strange, strange," muttered the old woman, coming back into the kitchen. "Are you really O'Grady?" said Midnight, staring at the old woman with his mouth open. "Yes, indeed," said the old woman with a smile that crinkled up her face. "I don't believe you," said Midnight. "I am," said the old woman. "Honour bright." "Take off your hat," said Midnight. The old woman took off her velvet hat with all the flowers and fruit on it, but she still looked like an old woman with hair like a horse's tail. "Do you believe me now?" she asked. "No," said Midnight. "Take off your hair." The old woman took off her hair and put it on the table, and slowly a smile began to creep across Midnight's face. He looked at the old woman's button-up boots, then he looked from bottom to top of her purple dress, then he looked at her fox fur collar, and finally he looked at O'Grady's face sticking up out of it. Then he threw back his head and laughed until he was weak. "What's the matter?" said O'Grady, grinning. "What's the joke?" But Midnight could only gurgle and choke. "No, tell me," said O'Grady, laughing to himself. Midnight got up from his chair and took O'Grady by the arm and led him to a looking-glass, and when O'Grady saw himself he shouted, "Oh, good grief," and he went into hysterics. So Midnight and Trooper O'Grady hung around each other's necks and laughed until they were tired, and until O'Grady had picked all of Midnight's pockets. Then O'Grady put the handcuffs on Midnight and took him away again to the great grey jail by the sea. When Midnight and Trooper O'Grady walked to the court the next morning, there was an even bigger crowd of ladies outside it. But this time Midnight was not so shy, and he waved to them quite sternly. Mrs. Schiffel was there, flourishing a flag and cheering, and so was the governor. Midnight bowed to the governor, and the governor took off his hat with the ostrich feathers on it and bowed back. It was lucky that Midnight was holding Trooper O'Grady's hand, or the governor might have seen that the trooper was wearing his ring. When Midnight and O'Grady arrived in the dock, which is kind of a cage for prisoners at the bar, Judge Pepper was writing in his book. He had made himself not a bad sort of wig out of one of Midnight's sheepskin shoes, but when he looked up and saw Midnight's face, his face went purple, and he shouted, "Villain, where is my wig?" "I have no idea," said Midnight, which was true. "I never saw it again after it flew out the window." "Lies, lies, lies," shouted the judge. "Do you deny that preposterous cockatoo is a member of your gang?" "That has nothing to do with me," said Midnight. "If he wants to belong to my gang, I can't stop him. Have you ever tried to stop a cockatoo from doing anything he wanted to do?" "Guilty," shouted the judge, banging on the bench with his shoe. "Guilty of what?" asked Midnight. "Aiding, abetting, procuring, and giggling at the bushranging of my wig," said the judge. 50 years in the great grey jar. Take him away." So back went Midnight to the clanking, clanging, groaning, echoing prison, and this time they put him in a much stronger cell, with bars that nobody could tear out of the wall. And when night came, and the warder brought him his supper, he found that they had given him a knife and fork made of wood. "This is going to be difficult for Cat," said Midnight to himself as he sat on his bed, staring at the stone slabs of the floor beneath his feet. Just then he felt a kind of scratching on the underneath of the stone. He took his wooden knife and fork and dug around the edge of one of the slabs, and when he lifted it, up jumped Jip, covered with earth, and kissed Midnight all over his face and inside his ears. "Ah, Jip, you are a good friend," said Midnight, kissing him back. Then he wriggled down the tunnel that Jip had dug and sprang onto Red Ned's bare back behind Cat, and they galloped away.